everyone, and welcome to our kickoff for William Mary's third annual Professionals Week. I am Michael Steelman, and I have the great pleasure of working with you and all the incredible members of the William Mary community to provide valuable career resources and professional events to enhance and strengthen our William Mary professional networks. Before I turn things over to our guest speakers, we do have a few technology items to cover, and I'm sure you're all pretty fluent on these reminders. Today's conversation is being recorded, and we will notify all registrants once the recording is available. For questions, please use the Q&A icon on the Zoom control menu. Throughout the hour, Professor Granger and I will monitor these questions and address them as time allows. Now on to our program. It is hard to believe that a year ago, in our last Professionals Week, more than 1,200 people participated in 33 events over 5 days, from panel discussions and happy hours to webinars. Just 2 weeks later, our in-person events as we knew them were put on pause. All of us had to figure out our new way of producing work, balancing the challenging environment and accelerating forward. It was not easy, but fortunately for William Mary, we had the amazing community of people who look out for each other and support one another. Thanks to technology and our amazing alumni professional network volunteer leaders, we were able to create our third annual William Mary Professionals Week. And I am truly grateful to all of you for being here to help kick it off. Although I don't have time to thank everyone directly, I do want to point out one individual who you will hear from shortly. Someone who has been an instrumental advisor to our initiatives for professionals over the past 5 years. And we asked last November to think about this week. He immediately provided his thoughts and willingness to help fellow alumni. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Mark Lynell to kick off our week. Mark graduated from William Mary in 1984 with an economics major. He also has an MBA from Wharton and an MA in Education and Human Development from George Washington University. He started his career in high tech, working for 15 years with Xerox PARC and Nortel Networks, working all around the world. He then moved to media with Time Inc. and Time Warner in New York. Mark then shifted to the communications and marketing industry with WPP. He spent 15 years as Chief Human Resources Officer, operating in 112 countries, and 10 years also chairing WPP's global public relations, public affairs, and government relations sector. He has served on a number of nonprofit boards focused on education, community, and support for individuals and families facing challenges, including the William Mary Alumni Association Board. With his wife, Janice Switzer Linaugh, he chaired the William & Mary Weekend in New York in 2017. Mark, we are fortunate to have you join us today. And without further ado, Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. It was very kind. Good afternoon, and good morning and good evening to everybody who's in a different time zone. I'm Mark Lynell, William Mary class of 1984. I'm delighted to welcome you to the William Mary Professionals Week. As you know, by virtue of the fact that you registered and joined here, there are events scheduled all week long. Today, I'll kick off the week for a few minutes, and then I'll pass the baton to Professor Tatia Granger and her team of fantastic panelists for their discussion on getting through and accelerating beyond the pandemic environment. For the week, the goal is to focus on addressing pressing topics in the manner that the William & Mary professional networks have built. First, the manner: sharing, connecting, and learning together. Every member of this community has talent, knowledge, insights, questions, and wisdom to share. Each of us can benefit from that. And the pressing topics: finding the right job, developing a resilient mindset, and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And there will be plenty of opportunities to network and build connections, no matter what stage of your career that you're in. In preparing for the week, we were asked to think about someone in the William & Mary community for whom we have gratitude for the role they've played in helping us achieve our professional goals. It's hard to choose just one. In this moment, I'm very grateful for Michael Steelman and all of his efforts to build this professional network for our community. Michael is the Director of Alumni Career Management Professional Networks. Our Alumni Association saw an opportunity and a need and recruited Michael 5.5 years ago to help us build a modern professional network. What he's accomplished and how he's engaged our alumni has exceeded all expectations. And Marilyn Midyat, the CEO of the William Mary Alumni Association and a great leader, has really high expectations. If you haven't met Michael, make sure that you introduce yourself to him in the course of the week or the following weeks. I'd also like to mention gratitude for the William & Mary professor who had the most impact on my academic and professional career, and whose insights and wisdom are particularly relevant to this present economy. That's economics professor Leonard Schifrin. Any of you who took a class with Professor Schifrin know that he was an engaged and highly demanding educator with a very direct and very challenging approach. He was the definition of firm but fair, and his expectations of us raised our expectations of ourselves. In a small junior and senior seminar in the early 80s, he returned our midterm exams and explained that our grades ranged from truly horrible to simply miserable. Not one was passing. He then went on to explain to us that the source of our underperformance was our mindset and our approach, not our effort. We were working hard and conscientiously, but we were doing precisely what had been expected of us. We were falling short on originality, developing secondary and tertiary levels of inquiry and analyses, and independent research and thinking. He found this frustrating, but more importantly, he was concerned that we needed to break out of a cycle of working incredibly hard to perform in the manner we'd been trained rather than in the manner that would be required of us. Professor Schifrin pointed out that all of us in this particular class were born at the tail end of the baby boom, and that as a result of this, it was crowded ahead of us with large population bulge. Probably the sort of thing that every generation of student and alum can sort of relate to, independent of which one of the named segments you were born into. It was going to be increasingly crowded in the organizations that we would be joining after graduation and whose growth might slow. It'd be crowded in the markets for housing where we might desire to live, and increasingly crowded on the roadways and public transit we'd be relying on to commute, something we hadn't really thought about, but he said would be a huge factor in our lives, given that we would spend so much of our waking time in it. As a result, if we stuck with the plan based on conventional wisdom at the time, we'd likely be laboring for longer, for less, in organizations that had slowing growth and opportunities, while commuting greater distances in slowing traffic to places that we didn't necessarily dream of living. He also pointed out that in breaking free of conventional thinking, there would be an opportunity to participate in a more dynamic and exciting future than we had imagined, as there'd be more opportunity in our lifetimes as globalization, advancing technology, liberalizing economic markets, and medical and pharmaceutical breakthroughs would create opportunities that were then difficult to imagine. And that the nature of work, careers, housing, commuting, learning, and leisure would evolve and adapt to new conditions. And this too is something to be embraced and contributed to. By the end of the semester, we'd all fulfilled the requirements of the course and received passing grades. It was a small enough seminar that we could look around and see that we all graduated eventually. While all these years later, we may not remember the specific content of that seminar, I doubt that any of us forgot the lessons that we learned from Professor Schifrin. In pulling my thoughts together for today, I went to the web for some background on Professor Schifrin. And I learned that sadly, he had passed away earlier this month at the age of 88. He lived a life of great impact in the William & Mary family, in the field of economics, and in the Williamsburg community, for which I am grateful. May his life's work and personal example inspire us to contribute fully as he did. Now for the topic of opening the conference and thinking about coming through and accelerating out of the pandemic. Hope, optimism, and confidence are necessary ingredients for these times. Not pie in the sky unfounded cheerfulness, but honest hope, optimism, and confidence with our teams, our organizations, our communities, our families, our friends, and ourselves. Kindness and empathy and positive energy can be in short supply and are badly needed. This isn't especially easy with what the last years have laid bare and the losses that so many people have experienced. Chief among them, the loss of loved ones, the loss of communities, and the loss of work. There's inspiration and the heroism all around us in the example of healthcare workers, ER doctors and nurses, EMTs, essential workers, educators, research scientists, and too many more to call out individually. But I would like to call out appreciation for all the people who keep things working in our communities by honoring the people who keep things working at William & Mary, the dining service providers, public safety employees, custodial staff, waste and recycling workers, and many more. They make an enormous contribution to what makes William & Mary so special. Just as the script for how to deal with our present duties as individuals, members of communities, professionals, leaders, students, and citizens wasn't written in advance for us, there isn't a set script for the future. Coming through and emerging out of this pandemic, each of us, individually and together, will contribute to the script, and we will revise it while underway. Our hope is that this week, you'll hear some good ideas and questions that you can put to use, that you'll share some good ideas and questions that will benefit others, and will help one another build a better future with a more inclusive and effective economy, governments, and communities. We also hope that you'll find this week's program to be energizing. The goal in coming through and accelerating out of the pandemic is not a return to any year in the past, but rather the creation of a new time, a better future, drawing on all of our hard-earned experiences. Thomas Friedman laid out the opportunity we have with this observation. More people in more places can now compete, connect, and collaborate in more ways for less money from more places than ever before. I'm going to repeat that. It's particularly relevant to coming through and accelerating out of the pandemic. More people in more places can now compete, connect, and collaborate in more ways for less money from more places than ever before. A new twist on the theme that Professor Schifrin was explaining 37 years ago, only now at hyperspeed. That's an enormous opportunity to leverage going forward. It's also an enormous threat to any person or organization who tries to return to how they were doing things before. It helps to view it as an urgent opportunity. What also helps is the coming return to growing economies. In the interest of time, we'll focus here for the moment on the US economy and at the macro level. Economists haven't agreed entirely on the shape of the recovery, but whether it's a flat out boom, a V shape, or a more gradual climb. But two of the historically most accurate predictors, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's survey of economists and Goldman Sachs, are forecasting rapid growth this year. The Philadelphia Fed forecasts US economic output increasing 4.5%, the highest growth since 1999. And Goldman Sachs expects the US economy to grow 6.8%, with unemployment dropping to 4.1% by December. So let's take the opportunity we have this week to learn from one another, to prepare ourselves intellectually and emotionally for the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead, to meet some people we can stay engaged with for the longer term in this community that we're building together. Led by Michael Steelman, the William & Mary Alumni Association, and University Advancement. Let's be generous with one another and with ourselves. My next mention of gratitude is to Professor Tatia Granger, who will now moderate our panel discussion. Professor Granger will introduce her panelists. They're truly great. I'd like to tell you about Professor Granger. She is Clinical Associate Professor in Organizational Behavior at William & Mary's Raymond M. Mason School of Business. She teaches both undergraduates and graduate students on the subjects of leadership, management, and organizational behavior. And these are also the areas of focus for her coaching and her consulting. We are tremendously fortunate to have her here leading our panel today. Professor Granger, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, so much for those encouraging and inspiring comments. We are also grateful for you and your desire to pour back into a community that you feel both indebted to as well as proud of. So thank you for that. Now I'd like to shift us towards the panel of the hour. And we have quite a set of experts for our audience, not just subject matter experts, but experiential experts. We have three exceptionally engaging and thoughtful leaders who will offer great insights about how we all think about what's next as professionals. And we are fortunate that they will do that from very different perspectives. So I know that you received their full bios and you will continue to hear snippets about what they are doing and have done throughout. But I would like to give just, I'd like to set the stage by sharing just a few comments. First, I'll start with AnnaMaria DeSalvo, who is with us. She is the global chairman and CEO of Hill+Knowlton Strategies, one of the world's leading strategic communication firms. She is going to enlighten us about all things communication through crisis. She has an extensive background at a number of organizations that you will recognize by name: DuPont, Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb. She also has extensive board experience. And my favorite aspect of her bio is that she is an executive in residence at the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. And in that role, she has visited at least one of my classes, and I can tell you that she's a fan favorite of our students here. We also have Chris Lee with us, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer right here on campus at William & Mary. Mr. Lee is responsible for, I should say Dr. Lee is responsible for this infrastructure that that is quite complex here on campus, and yet he is making things happen for us in a more transformational versus transactional way. And so we'll get to hear from him not only about the perspective from what's happening here, but just about preparing employees in general for what is to come. And he brings an exceptional background of combination of military and education and consulting, and pay close attention. He's an author. He might even share his latest book with us. And then last but not least, we have Kristen Vaughan, who is a managing director at Accenture Federal Services, and she is leading all of the areas that are so relevant to our conversation together, including she's leading the human capital practice, but the topics that she can shine light on include talent management and leadership development, organization design, HR change enablement, and I could go on and on. One of my favorite aspects about Kristen that I discovered is that we share coaching. And so she too is an ICF certified coach. So we share that. So I'm very excited about unleashing this panel of experts on you today. And so I prepared them for my first question. And I'll just ask that maybe they answer in the order that I introduced them. So AnnaMaria, if you don't mind going first, and then Chris, you could follow, and then Kristen. And so I'm just going to start out by asking each of you to describe, and this may be more challenging than it sounds, in one word, and then offer a brief summary of that word, the last year of work from where you sit, and tell us what that is and how that has looked to prepare us for looking forward. AnnaMaria?
Thank you, Tasha. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this panel. Actually, I don't remember you asking us about one word, but I'm glad you did. And I would choose the word inspiring, because even though it's just been an extraordinarily challenging year, a year like no other year, and replete with difficulties and headwinds and to some degree trauma and devastation, the way that people and companies have responded has just been remarkable. And I've learned so much and been so inspired by those responses, and feel like somehow I found another gear for the rest of my life. So inspiring.
Thank you. Dr. Lee?
I would say relentless. Regardless of what happened, it was a series of kind of unprecedented events, right? Just thing after thing after thing. And I think that's was the challenge of the year. If it were one thing, it would have been a lot easier to digest. But we had a series of really kind of dynamic forces at play.
Great, thank you. And Kristen?
I'd say flexible. The changes, like Chris mentioned, relentless. Like the changes kept coming, right? We had the pandemic, we have political upheaval, we have equality in the world, in the workplace. But I think we just kept on adapting to new ways to meet those challenges, right? One thing got thrown at us and we kind of went left, another thing thrown at us, we went right? We're just kind of adapting and being able to get through it the best we can in the world that we know it, right? Even though it's constantly changing.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to another question that I'd like for all of you to respond to in whatever order it moves you. But we heard in Mark's opening comments about hope, optimism, and confidence. And then you all have mentioned words like inspiring, relentless, and flexible. And so if we think about these as necessary ingredients for the times that we've been through, what specific actions or strategies would you recommend or suggest for professionals to demonstrate these traits in their work in order to move forward?
I can start with that. I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind as a leader is being what I call truly human. And by that, I mean being empathetic, um, getting to know people on a personal level, right? When the pandemic first started back in March of 2020, we all took those extra 5 to 10 minutes in the beginning of phone calls and virtual conference calls that lasted all day to really check in on our peers, right? And our coworkers and a family, right? To say, how are you doing? And I think we got to know people on a more personal level where you saw for the first time, maybe the inside of their home. You saw that they had kids or they have pets or they're caring for an elderly parent. You saw so many things and you saw insights into their life where we're not all put together with our glossy cover photos all the time, right? We're living life and just being truly human and realizing that you can't balance it all, right? Something has to give. So I'd say as leaders, just being able to be truly human and, demonstrate that of yourself and then see how that reflects in others and demonstrating that in others really helps. I think just opens up everyone's eyes to say, you know what, I'm not going to have a normal work schedule. Things are going to change. I'm not going to be able to support everything. I'm doing the best I can. And here's what I can give you. So I think it's, communicating that and just really being truly human to connect with others and your work.
Great, thank you. Can I ask, Chris, can you jump in here and talk about maybe what you've seen, at least locally, within the immediate William and Mary community? And then I want to shift to AnnaMaria about kind of responses in times of what seems like crisis.
Right. Well, if you allow me to frame my response and say,
Sure.
as you know, I was going to mention, the book, right? Performance Conversations, book that I published in October, but it's apropos because it talks about this framing of what I would call 21st century management. And it has elements of what Kristen talked about. I think, the world has shifted. I mean, we got globalism, we got diversity, we got technology, we're 24/7, we're remote, we got millennials. A lot of it has changed. My argument is that we need new paradigms, right, in order to address issues, and we need new ways of working, new tools. So, last century, as Kristen would probably echo, you didn't really have a relationship with people, more like the boss and the employee or the supervisor and the performer. Now it's very important that people have relationships, that people understand and appreciate who they work with. And what I've been saying is a kind of a catchphrase of the book being about the leader, coach, counseling, and cheering on people, right? And the whole idea that Mark said it best about hope, optimism, and confidence. And the subtitle of the book talks about boosting the confidence of those you work with. And last year was kind of case in point. I mean, relentless year, challenge, dynamic, or whatever. And sometimes people just needed a pat on the back or encouragement to get back into the fray, to help when they're stumbling, realizing this, Kristen said, we've been invited into people's bedrooms and dining rooms and basements and seeing how they live and the challenges they have. If now more than ever, we need leaders to be able to help the individual and help them cope with the challenges that's before us. So for me, it's all about building infrastructure to help leaders do exactly that. And we've been doing some of that on campus, and trying to enable our leaders to engage with people differently and on a much more personal level.
Thank you. AnnaMaria, could you add to that from the perspective of once we have these frameworks and we're thinking about, how to demonstrate, how do we communicate that in a way that supports forward progress and movement?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think bringing together some of the themes we've already heard, I feel like what has always been a powerful practice or a best practice has been around, trust building, authenticity and communication, authenticity in leadership, and values and purpose-driven leadership. So we know that that's the great companies and great leaders, have always, I think, drawn on a reservoir of ability and commitment in those areas. And I think that everything we've been through over the last year has just, made that paradigm even more powerful and more visible to the world. And I think about recently, I think it was Korn Ferry who did some very good research. They did some work with some of the leading public company CEOs and board members to find out how leadership has changed over the last year. And I think that one of their major conclusions is very resonant with what Kristen has said, which is that CEOs in particular have had to become radically human, that the qualities of transcendent leaders, the leaders who transcend sort of, time and industry and the ones that we always think about and look to as being extraordinary transcendent leaders, that their qualities have now become table stakes for all leaders, really, and that this crisis has really forced many of us into a much more authentic method of engagement with all of our stakeholders. The employee has become, really at the epicenter of the way that we have to think about the world in a corporate environment, or in a public sector environment. And I think that's a very, very positive change. So when you ask me about communication and putting it into practice and crisis communication, there's a lot to say on that topic. But maybe I can just focus on, something very concrete and positive that I think has come out of the last year's experience, which is the centricity of the employee, the realization that everything starts and ends, with the workforce, and that you have to build it from the inside out. So if you're having a crisis of trust or tremendous ambiguity or uncertainty in your markets, a lot of stress and distraction, that the workforce really has to cohere. There has to be a commitment to wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness, that communication plays a large role in both those domains, and that there needs to be real connection across the company between employees, but especially with leadership. And that's why leaders are really, over-indexed on Zoom and Microsoft Teams and, kind of just descending into, every forum they can, or participating in every forum they can at any time of day or night, because we've learned how important those authentic interactions are, that we have to keep it real, we have to keep it real time, and we have to, really lean into the opportunity remotely to stay connected and to keep people connected and to really demonstrate values and purpose. So I don't want to go on and on, but those are just maybe a couple of reflections that could get us started.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to say to my other panelists, please feel free to chime in if there is a moment where you feel especially connected to the commentary. I'm going to pause.
Well,
Okay,
I can draw a thread there.
Okay, that'd be
the
great.
trust building, the radically human, in communication, I think is a thread. Just that says that the leader, must be in communication with people to check in to see how they're doing. I mean, so I think that's part of it, to ensure that we have a pulse on what's going on and providing people with the responsiveness that they need to be engaged and to perform.
I was going to shift to Kristen to ask a little bit about, with this concept, I love this thought of the employee-centric experience. And given your path, particularly in talent development, maybe focusing just a little bit on how organizations respond from a support space of helping to build skills or new skill sets, if you will, to prepare our employees for what's beyond, what's next, given where we've been.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as I think about it, the future of work is never going to be the same, right? We're never going to go back to the way we were pre-March of 2020. And so agencies and companies, as they start looking at their talent and their workforce, they're going to approach that differently. So traditionally, right, you think about bringing in new talent. What do I need to do? I need to hire people, right? So we look at recruiting. In the past, employers were always bound by location, right? So I can only recruit in this area from these colleges and universities or from these big companies that I compete with, right? And as the pandemic has shown us, we're no longer bound by those walls, right? Recruiting spans now, nationally, globally even, right? People can work anytime, anywhere in most cases. So it's really going to shift the amount of talent that you can look to bring into your organization. I think also as you look, we call it the 4 Bs, right? When you're looking at talent, it's build it, so you can train it, you can buy it, so you can hire people, you can borrow it, hire contractors, and you can bot it, right? You can use AI, analytics, and that type of thing to kind of augment your workforce. So when you have the 4 Bs, the build, buy, bot, or borrow, really looking at, if I want to build my talent in-house, I need to start reskilling them, right? So identifying what skills my workforce has today and how I'm going to upskill them or reskill them is really important, right? And a lot of our, AI comes into play there as well, where you're looking at how can technology really augment or supplement my workforce. It's not taking away jobs, but it's really thinking about how can I best use technology to maybe focus people on some more higher level skilled things that they need to really use their brains for. So as we look at reskilling the workforce, it's not just about technology, right? We're seeing a lot of companies and agencies focusing on what's traditionally called soft skills, right? There's leadership, communication, change management. And we like calling these power skills, not soft skills, right? Soft skills makes it sound like it's fluffy and it's easy. But in real cases, most companies, their people struggle with the softer skills, right? They might have analytics down pat. They might know Java or Python really easily, right? But some of the softer skills, those power skills, are harder to learn and communicate with. And as Chris and AnnaMaria mentioned, working across the workforce, especially in times like this, requires a lot of communication, right? You really have to be a leader, set a good example, but then check in with people, share your vision, see how people are doing, and making sure that everyone's operating, off the same sheet of music and has the same strategic vision. So as I look at reskilling the workforce, that's a big part of this is upskilling and reskilling those softer skills as well. So I think talent always has driven the workforce, but I think as we look at it from a broader scale, we're just looking at much more broader focused efforts from agencies and companies as opposed to doing it in pockets for smaller skill sets. So it's really opened the aperture in my mind.
I love that reference to soft skills, power skills, as the OB professor in me is just jumping up and down here. Thank you. Chris, can you talk a little bit about maybe what changes we might see here on campus and how that influences who we are as an employer of choice?
Yes. So let me piggyback on Kristen's thought about, skills. Last May, we introduced this idea of 4 competencies that all women and employees need to have. We kind of launched it, soft launch, a lot was going on. And so we kind of backed off a little bit. But we're going to hold on to them because they're following President Rowe's, guidance and leadership. And she actually helped us, debut the idea of our quote, learning forward competencies. So it's 4 things. It's flexibility, going back to Kristen's comment, flexibility, innovation, technology acumen, and inclusive collaboration. So these 4 ideas that we all need to kind of, upskill, if you will, on in order to position us and empower us to be effective professionals in the 21st century. So we'll see those things rolled out in many ways over years to come. This is not a kind of an episodic sort of thing, but these are kind of core capacity, if you will, things for people to have. And so we'll have a series of training programs and development programs and other activities around that. So we originally introduced it last spring. For example, we did like innovation, and we had an internal expert kind of preview some things. Then we had an external expert, kind of give us a talk. And then we had a kind of panelist at the end to reflect upon what we had learned over those 3 kind of different training and development sort of programs. But I think it was a whisper event, amplification event and an echo event or something like that. We had a little nice little phrase way of thinking about it, but more of that to come, because it's about preparing us to be effective in this kind of 21st century. What's the acronym VUCA? You know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time we live in. So being adaptable, using technology, focused on innovation and inclusive collaboration as well, which can't be underscored because that's the diversity and the idea that organizations that win in the 21st century will be those who can fully engage everybody and make the best use of everybody's talent, bringing them together to be an effective, kind of team working together.
Thank you. I'm glad you highlighted inclusive collaboration. That was one I was going to ask both Kristen and AnnaMaria to touch on. Kristen already mentioned kind of how we're bringing down, some walls in terms of finding talent and this notion of inclusive collaboration. AnnaMaria, can I start with you? Can you say a bit about maybe what that means, what that looks like from your perspective as we move forward?
Thank you. Yes, it's been one of the incredible experiences of the last year that we've all really zoomed in on what it means to truly be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And it's created moments of necessary and I hope very productive discomfort, at many organizations at every level, having to really self-assess and examine the degree to which we really are inclusive. And I speak very personally in terms of running a global company that we're very diverse. We're one of the world's most global, most international public relations and public affairs firms. So we're fundamentally diverse because we're so international. And yet when you go into certain parts of our business and certain operations, we had to come to terms with the fact that we don't have, in every case, the kind of inclusive environment we need. And because we are a talent business, our currency is talent. And not only are we a talent business, meaning that people are our product, but our whole purpose is to help our clients connect and communicate well with their stakeholders. So if we're not inclusive, if we're not diverse, if we don't have the quality of those relationships within our own company, I think it immediately compromises our own ability to be effective and our own currency in the marketplace. So we've really, really prioritized understanding what it means to have inclusive collaboration across our company, how to help our clients ask those questions of themselves and consider how to grow and improve in that regard. But inclusivity and inclusive collaboration, I think fundamentally really recognizes the power of that diversity and the fact that you basically have a false product if it isn't adequately diverse and if your collaboration and innovation process isn't adequately inclusive. You're sort of, kind of flawed, before you even stand up. You can't, you're not walking and running in the way that you need to be smart, to be competitive, and to be relevant. So I said the word inspiring at the beginning of the panel, and it's because these have been crucible moments for us in the last year. I mean, we've really had some remarkably difficult times to work through, but they have forced us, especially on this issue. I think it's just forced us to come to terms with where we are and to set agendas with respect to how to become better. And that's something that I'm actively living every day in my company. And I'm so pleased that, we're all very committed to that process, but it's inclusive collaboration is essential for success and relevance today and in the future. I think that's something that's been a fundamental shift.
Thank you.
I completely agree. I mean, I think the last year has really opened our eyes from an inclusivity standpoint, right? And being more aware of our actions. And I think more importantly, our inactions, right? Sometimes that's, if we don't take any action at all or don't take a stand, that can be just as bad. And I think I liked your point too around measurement, right? If something is important, we have to measure and track it and report out on it from the top levels of any organization. Because if we set internal goals and don't tell anyone, it's not going to go anywhere, right? We're not really going to move the needle. So it's being accountable and responsible for that. And I think diversity and inclusion really, you know, like we talked about, it brings diversity of thought and ideas and new collaborations, right? And we bring together people that all have different mindsets, and you come up with these amazing things, right? We don't want everyone to be in the room that's all has the same idea. And you look at how this spills over into technology, right? A lot of the things we're talking about at Accenture are, you know, is there bias in AI, right? Because a human is ultimately programming some of the artificial intelligence, right? Do we have biases in the way the rules are written, or the things we set up? So we need to be really aware of those things all the way from the beginning, right? Because it can filtrate into so many other things besides just, you know, a point in time interview or a team meeting. There's so many things that can bring about lack of diversity and lack of inclusion. We make sure that we address it from the very beginning and that very, you know, first touch point where people collaborate and leaders communicate with employees.
Thank you all. We do have a few questions popping up in the Q&A that I want to get to. We have started to talk about future state of work, and so some of these relate to that. The first question is, what are the top 3 requirements that organizations must provide in pandemic, post-pandemic, and COVID-19 world, endemic world? Is it employee health, employee workforce flexibility within the organization? Is it online, offline, interpersonal navigation, or emotional intelligence, or you pick? Those are some suggestions from the question. Anybody want to tackle that? What are the top 3 requirements, that organizations need to think about?
I'm not sure if this will hit the mark or not, Tasha, but flexibility, tools, resources. So flexibility, because people have all kinds of, you know, life requirements. I always joke about like snow days and things like that, and I think the pandemic applies, that all of our decisions are around school buses, right? We can say what we want, whether we're going to open or close, but half our workforce can't come to work if the school buses aren't running. And then all of a sudden, the school buses didn't run. And so, you know, we couldn't just say, okay, you have kids at home, you can't work. So they required us to be a little more flexible. And then, I saw this ad from the Society for HR Management. It said the future arrived early, because we've been headed that way anyway. Remote work, 365 work. So now people have all kinds of opportunities and abilities to work from anywhere 24/7. Why do we insist people show up right here between 8 and 5 to do their work? So I think flexibility is paramount. And then the tools and resources to do that. So, certainly some training, some policies and procedures, some technology and things like that to enable all of that, versus the old school fixed one way of seeing work. You have to be in front of me between, 8 and 5 with an hour lunch. I think work is going to be different. I don't think we have all the answers, but I think we do need to shift our paradigm.
Anybody else?
I love that list, Chris. I think the one thing I would add to it is probably wellness, right? I think companies are going to have to continue to focus on wellness. So it's, are people healthy? Am I taking care of them? Are there programs I can offer through support groups, through medical benefits, through counseling, through health checks, right? Preventative care. Are there things that I can offer to make sure that they're physically and mentally stable and thriving, right? I think that's kind of that's bringing that truly human person back together. Like, you, as a leader, you can't manage others if you can't take care of yourself, right? So putting yourself first as a leader, taking care of yourself, and then making sure that you can check in on others and making sure that you have those programs and policies in place for wellness programs and support for your company.
You hit the nail on the head, and then prompted a question that came in specifically for AnnaMaria, but about that topic in terms of what is the most important for organizations from a communication standpoint to focus on how we shift coming out of the pandemic, especially not losing sight of employees' well-being?
Yeah, I see the question. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna I see that Jacob Miller has asked about external dynamics as well. So I'm going to, I'm going to just maybe start by acknowledging that if we're talking about companies, whether they're public or private, obviously the tremendous purpose of any company is to create value. And, I think that the lens on value creation and how we create value for our various stakeholders, including shareholders, is very much the aperture through which companies and boards and investors are looking at their businesses now. And so I think that to address the external part of the question, and then I'll bring it back to the employee, I think that there is just a tremendous opportunity right now to think about our role in value creation and what our stakeholders need and expect of us in terms of that purpose. When they think about the value we create, what do they see? What do they want? What do they expect of us? How are we performing against those expectations? And how do we interact with those expectations and help shape those expectations? But then how do we very objectively assess and measure our own performance against those expectations? And then how do we adjust and how do we course correct and constantly optimize how well we're creating value? So I think that is, a really important cycle of strategy and innovation and communication and trust building, because I think that if you're working that cycle well, you are helping to establish trust and reinforcing that trust over time, which of course makes it much more resilient. So there are, reputation management and communication strategies that are holistic, that think about that entire cycle. And I think it's almost never been more important to do that well. And that's one of the reasons why I love telling my team at Hill+Knowlton that there's never been a better time to be in our business. It's so exciting and it's so important, and we play such a large role in the communication domain around value creation. Bringing that back to the employee, and I'll just link it back to something that I said a few minutes ago, which is, that it really does start with the employee, and so much so, one of the roles that I have is as a non-executive vice chairman of the board of directors of a large public company. And that company is in transportation and logistics. So it's an essential business with many frontline workers all around the world. And the company's done very well in many respects through the pandemic, but really prioritized worker safety and, made an outsized investment in the second quarter of last year on worker safety. And, the performance, all of our safety measures ultimately protected our workforce such that, both the morbidity and mortality associated with COVID was lower across our workforce of 100,000 employees than it was in the general population, even though these were people who were in warehouses and on docks and, making economies run, every single day. So, yeah, so it was a tremendous effort. It's still a tremendous effort. But I recently completed a round of discussions with our big institutional investors. So the big, index funds, the big pension funds who invest in the company, and with their stewardship teams, really wanting to talk about employees, which was remarkable. I mean, it was just wonderful that I would have 30 or 45 minutes with these multi-trillion-dollar funds, and they wanted to know about employees, and they wanted to know what we were doing with and for our employees. They wanted to know about what we learned through the pandemic, what practices we would continue post-pandemic. It was, and of course, many people or most people or almost everyone on this call may be familiar with the acronym ESG, and of course, the environmental, social, and governance factors that drive long-term sustainable value are constantly now being measured, and there's much more pressure from investors to perform from an ESG standpoint, and probably more regulation in that area coming as well. There are some investors and others who think of ESG now as being EESG, where the first E stands for employees. more commonly the S, typically the social factors typically cover workforce and employee issues. But, you know, I'm just really making the point, trying to bring it all together. When you think about value creation, when you think about long-term sustainable value creation, especially for shareholders, you have to have a healthy workforce. And, you know, our investors know that and expect that. And, you know, and as fiduciaries, you know, that's what we want, and that's what we're responsible and accountable for. And I think what's so exciting and interesting is how employee wellness will evolve, or how it will be defined going forward. And I think one of the great outcomes of this entire experience has been the further destigmatization of mental health, and the fact that we talk about it so much more readily and openly, and it's holistic. You know, we think about it as an integrated model of health, and we're much more proactive about thinking about our employees' mental health and what those needs are and how to solve for those needs in new and innovative ways. So I'm very encouraged. I'm thinking that things are going to be a lot better than they once were in that respect.
You raised some great points, and some of our questions are kind of specifically, how do we support that well-being, right? So how are policies going to change, or what might we, as you mentioned, have learned about our policies that we need to adjust going forward in order to be of support of the holistic employee? And Chris and Kristen, there's a couple in the Q&A about specific policies. I'll just put that out there. Should employees adopt sick leave and parental leave like other countries like Germany, which suggest maybe we've learned something about leave during this time? And then also, we all recognize the incredible impact that working from home has had on families, particularly, you know, the dual income or single parent families who are forced to work, and maybe they have kids, so they're educating and working, and all of that is tied back to employee well-being and the mental health piece. Chris, do you want to say a word about policies?
I'll jump in. You know, I can't believe that, you know, we're in the world's richest economy and we don't have basic kind of infrastructure for sick leave and parental leave and things like that. Most of our peers do. The idea that a person has to choose between going to work sick or staying home is crazy. The pandemic has exposed that. Now that it's in the public health, it's good that a person didn't have to kind of, you know, make that choice. So I'm glad to see the conversation has moved. Hopefully we can get there. And it's kind of selfish. It's a 20th century idea that employees are interchangeable. You know, you don't come to work, we'll get somebody else and that sort of thing. It's totally antithetical to the idea of talent, that we value the people and what they can contribute, and building a team, building a culture, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully we've advanced our thinking. And if I can also finish on the idea of policy, we've recently changed at the university, you know, like many other organizations, away from traditional performance appraisals to the sort of check-in sort of approach, which I think gets at the policy. How do you work with individuals, right? You quote, check in with them to provide, you know, the kind of support and encouragement that people need, and find out where they are as a human being to ensure that they're able to perform their best. And sometimes it's a distraction, it's not work, right? And they can also have an opportunity of intervening. So I think that's an example of a policy sort of intervention to help people kind of manage and cope so that they can get back to work, you know, to you know, be productive and engaged employees.
Kristen, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, you know, what I've seen a lot with, I work mostly with federal government agencies in my job. And what I've seen a lot is, you know, obviously the policies lag the technology, right? We have the technology to work remote, to securely operate, to connect and collaborate. But a lot of times the policies don't allow that, right? So it's someone has to be physically in the office to perform their duties, or so their job description says, right? Or they don't have the sick leave, so they have to come in and they risk exposing other people, right, to being sick. And so I think we need to take a hard look at, you know, we have a lot of times we do have the infrastructure and the security. I think those are the two biggest pieces, right? The technology and the security to be able to enable those policies. And if those are in place, I definitely think, you know, we need to look at updating those and changing those to make it more real for for what's going on, right? As I mentioned before, we're never going back to the way we were before 100%. So to say that someone's going to be 100% back in the office every day, or you remember the days, I mean, everyone knows people would come in sick and they'd be seen as like the person toughing it out, right? Because they're coughing, they're exposing everyone to germs, but they're like, oh, they're a trooper, they're in the office, right? That's not going to happen anymore. I mean, it's why would we do that anyways, right? Why would you come in if you're sick? It seems so funny to say now, because we're all hyper aware of that. So if someone sneezes, everyone's like, oh, and they're like, it's allergies, right? So we're kind of shifted to the other side, but I think there has to be that balance, right? Of like self-care we talked about, right? Wellness, and self-care, and you should be able to work from home if your job allows it, right? And shifting those policies, I think is a lot of having to do with that, and providing the support where people feel like it's okay to miss a day of work to be sick and they're not going to lose their jobs, right? We're not talking about the higher end professional jobs. We're talking about that on the flip side of that, right? And I think that we have to enable our economy and jobs to be able to, and people to survive and jobs like that and take care of themselves and their families first.
Thank you. You know, I noticed we're getting so caught up, but we are getting close to the end of our time together. And I do want to ask everybody for kind of final comments. You started off by giving us words, you know, to describe kind of how you've seen, you know, work, or how you would describe work over the last year. And I noted inspiring, relentless, and flexible. And so I'd like to ask you to wrap up with another kind of summary word, and maybe it's the same, but a summary word just for our audience to think about as they move forward and try to process how they will move beyond. None of us knowing what beyond looks like at this point, but what advice would you give, maybe in a word and a short summary? So I'll go in reverse order this time. I'm going to start with Kristen.
I would say resiliency. Just thinking about how in the future you can be resilient, right? Things are going to keep on changing. Just how you think about you reposition yourself and your team to be a leader and really kind of stretch yourself and be flexible in those times.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Chris, you're muted.
We didn't get through the hour without someone saying you're muted. Man, I was trying, you know, to do my part. So I would say coaching, because no one succeeds alone. And we have to lean on others. And if we develop the right paradigm relationship with others, we find support in them, they find support in us, and that we help each other, you know, kind of cope and get through it. So I think that's one of the roles of a leader, but also peers, right? I mean, we have to help one another adapt, overcome to the challenging times we're in. I always say that if you're doing it alone, you're doing it wrong. And so the idea of others is part of the answer.
Great, thank you. AnnaMaria?
Those are wonderful answers, and I'm going to try to link to both of them by offering the words growth mindset. And Kristen talked about resiliency, and it's some of you will know Dr. Carol Dweck, the psychologist who's done important work on growth mindset, and her major point is that the key to resiliency is having a growth mindset, and a growth mindset really means converting or transforming our traumas in life, the crucibles of all of our different difficult experiences, and converting them into personal growth and transformation. And you know, I think that we've been reflecting a lot on how that's we've seen that a lot of that this year, you know, and that will be one of the great legacies of 2020 and 2021. But hopefully something that we can all embrace and own and maintain as a paradigm, you know, that every time we're challenged in ways we didn't expect, or even more than we ever expected, it's an opportunity for the kind of growth that we also might never have foreseen or been capable of.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to all three of you for your time and your talents in sharing both with us today. I want to thank you for really keeping us in a space of hope and optimism and confidence, as Mark started out, and then, helping us figure out how to get down that path to beyond. The one thing I will say, and just want to remind everybody in the audience about, is we are, this is our tribe. We are the William and Mary family. And depending on your perch, your purview, internal, external, for the moment, we're all connected. And I'd just like to remind everybody to think about what Chris said about coaching and that other centricness that really helps us all move forward in a way that will take us to the other side of this situation in a way we can't even imagine. But again, I just want to thank our panelists today and thank our audience for tuning in. And with that, I want to turn it back over to Michael Steelman for any final comments.
Well, Professor Granger, thank you. What an amazing hour to kick off this week. And Mark, haven't forgotten about your very caring and very hopeful remarks. It was really moving, and obviously the Professor Schifrin story resonated with a lot of our attendees. So that was really touching that you shared that example of connection. And Kristen, AnnaMaria, and Chris, thank you all. I know how busy your days are. We truly appreciate the time that you gave to us to prepare your remarks and to also join us for this hour. It is a lot of time out of your busy schedule, so we really appreciate that. There you are, Mark. Thank you for joining us. I just want to share a quick overview of the week remaining. We have events every day. Tomorrow, you can kind of go in depth on sort of the growing grit and do a workshop with alumna Kirsten Jones. And then 3 o'clock network. We have an online networking hour for one-on-one text chats with alumni around the world. And then on Wednesday, we're going to take, DE&I is a topic that we already touched on today for a good amount of time, but we'll take a full day connected to that and really deep dive into it. So we have 3 different sessions starting at noon Eastern, going to 4 o'clock Eastern. I recommend you taking a look and checking out those 3 different events. Then on Thursday, we'll be addressing finding or creating the right job and exploring your passion and values and skills. So your career trajectory and where you're going and what you're thinking at different stages. So whether you're young professional figuring out what do you do next after this incredible wild year, or do you kind of mid-career or in your late career, where are you going? And we'll address all of those topics. And then last, we'll celebrate. We'll network with one another. To Professor Granger's remarks just now, we'll support each other, we'll help each other, we'll learn about each other's needs, and we'll check out a new technology called Gatherly that we'll use for that hour. So with that, I'm going to leave you with one last challenge. I want each of you to think about someone in your William & Mary community who has contributed to your professional success. As Mark mentioned, it was Professor Schifrin. And for those of you who might be an alumni, a classmate, a faculty or staff member, a mentor, someone, a student that you've worked with, use the hashtag WM Professionals Week and share on social media, share your thoughts about today, your week, experiences and your professional goals, but include also the gratitude for that person who contributed to your success. And we look forward to reading your stories. We're going to follow that hashtag and we're going to share them with our wider William & Mary community. We're going to help each other grow this year, and we're going to help each other focus this week on our professional goals. So with that, I say thank you to each of you again for a terrific hour. Good luck with everything this week. Stay well. That's important. That's our most important thing. And support one another. Go Tribe.
Go Tribe. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.